to me today.
There we go.
Great, yes. Okay, so I'm going to take a look at what's happening in the consumer world and reflect back on what I think that means for publishers when it comes to website design and usability. So Greg has already given me a very nice introduction. Thank you. I'm Melinda Kenneway, Director of a marketing agency, and I may not be an expert in kind of technical usability, but I'm certainly an avid consumer of digital content, and also I spend a lot of time working with publishers to help them redesign their web space, or rather than web space now, I think we have to think of it as a digital experience to make it much more customer-centric, and particularly with two goals in mind: to encourage greater usage of our content, but also to encourage enjoyment of the usage of that content, hence the title of my talk, The Pleasure Principle. And I think enjoyment of using our services is something I'm going to touch on quite a lot through this talk, because for me it's kind of the missing link in the publishing industry at the moment. So, moving on. Obviously, academic publishing is not the most light-hearted of industries. We're a very serious business. There's a lot of money at stake in what we do, and we need to use that money responsibly. And also, we have very, very highly technical content for very specialist audiences. And we are dealing with very, very educated authors and readers. And of course, they all look brains from Thunderbirds. Or certainly in our mind, I think that's the stereotype we have. And I, in common with many of you in this room, are in this industry because we have a sense that we're doing something for the greater good. So, there are some very, very serious, heavyweight issues around all of those things. And I think that we're kind of at risk of letting that go to our head a bit. And another cartoon illustration here. I hope many of you will be familiar with Scooby-Doo. And this is Velma from Scooby-Doo. You may know that Velma is the incredibly intelligent character, if perhaps the one that's less gifted in the looks department, as compared to her slightly less intelligent but very beautiful friend Daphne. And certainly as I've moved around the academic industry, I really have a sense that people feel if we make our services attractive, somehow that kind of affects the academic credibility of that content. And we've really got to get over that. I'll give you a real example. This friendly-looking figure represents the editor, a very prestigious journal that I have worked with. And this is a quote, a direct quote that came out of a conversation of how we might look at making that journal's content more easy to use, more digestible, more accessible. We were thinking about navigation and structure. We were also thinking about perhaps producing some new kinds of content packages. And he was really resistant to this, and he had that kind of expression on his face as he explained to me, that's not the kind of audience that we have. They don't want spoon-feeding, and they shouldn't be spoon-fed. It's almost as if he was saying it's our job to make things difficult for our readers. And again, we've really got to overcome that idea. We not only deal with very intelligent people in terms of our customers, most of the people in this room are incredibly intelligent. Publishing attracts some of the best minds in the country. I keep very quiet about my own degree from Oxford because, believe you me, when I worked at OUP, I was surrounded by PhDs and far more highly qualified people than myself. And there's almost a kind of joy in the complexity, the intellectual challenge of grappling with the difficult. This is my idea of a publisher's coffee-making machine in an ideal world. Let's make things as difficult as we possibly can. But we've got to wake up to the fact that our users are working in a very different space. They're in a very different environment. And whilst they might be incredibly intelligent, do they really want us to make getting to our content as difficult as sometimes we do make it? Their expectations are really being driven by these guys who don't have the complexity of content to grapple with that we do. but they are very, very good at putting forward a brand and a proposition in a very, very simple way. So our users are being influenced by that kind of environment. And I sort of went from that position to take a look at a couple of publishers just to remind myself, well, how are we presenting our content? And I looked at two of the big leading journals, of course. There's Nature. I mean, it's beautifully designed. It's well structured. I'm sure if you had usability testing on that, it would be scoring highly. And same with Science. And there's no doubt there's an awful lot of complex services that they're presenting as well as the content. But I do think we're making it harder than is necessary. When you see new people coming into our industry, they take a much more direct and simplistic approach, especially on their home pages. So Mendeley, this is traditional marketing. It's all benefits-led. It's very simple. It's a proposition you can get to grips with. I think a lot of publishers don't really quite put together that proposition as effectively as they could at the moment. So there's a great simplicity here in the way in which these services are portrayed. And here's another example of a company we've just started working with. Actually, it's a new startup, two guys in their 20s who are building a aggregator platform for e-textbook content. And it's simple, and it's fun, and it's engaging. And although there's a complex service underneath that initial portal, the entry into it is made really simple and straightforward. So I think we as publishers have to find some kind of middle space between the complexity as we display it at the moment and the simplicity of some of these new services. And the other challenge that we have to get to grips with is, of course, we can't really control the customer experience nearly as much as we might like to think we can. So we know that people come deep into our content at a very granular level. So how do we create that simple experience for them, not only at the sort of opening page to the content, but right down into the very sort of granular layers as well? And to give you an example of just how much of a problem this is, my company did some market research recently for a publisher, big surgical journal, as it happens. And this journal has all sorts of bells and whistles and amazing services available from its website. And it's beautifully designed, but still somewhat complex. And our brief was to evaluate how well readers understood what the services were on offer, what they felt the benefits were, and whether they were using them or not. Now, it may or may not surprise you to know that the results of that were incredibly stark in that nobody knew what all these services were, nobody was using them, nobody understood what the benefits were. Some of them had got to grips with e-talks, and that was still a minority. They went in and they looked at an article and then they used a one-word search box. I don't think that says anything about the capabilities of our audience, but I think it says a lot about the complexity of the way in which we present our content. Okay. So, as Greg also mentioned, my sort of academic background is psychology, so I have to bend everything into some sort of psychological model if I possibly can. And this is Maslow's pyramid of needs. And his premise, he's a psychologist working in the 40s, his premise is that there's human beings have a hierarchy of needs that need to be fulfilled, starting with those that are the very basic survival skills, the physiological level of needs that need to be met. But we have all these other needs too, and if these aren't satisfied as well, we can start feeling really quite uncomfortable. So yes, we need to satisfy the survival pieces, but these other things matter too. And if you try and map that hierarchy of needs back against website usability, you can see the very basic requirement that we have to fulfill is making it functional. And that, to me, was the 90s when websites were first launching. Then we all began to start worrying about reliability. And then, increasingly, we started to get, and are starting to get, interested in the real utility of our content. But we're only just starting to get into this area now. And then there's this whole top part of the pyramid, the fun part, the pleasurable part, the enjoyable part of using our content that I don't think we really touched on at all. And more than that, I have a sense we don't want to touch on it. We don't value it. We don't necessarily think it's important. And that, to me, ties back to this idea of academic rigor and some sort of disconnect between the human sort of emotions that need to be satisfied through the services that we're providing. So I think there's a real opportunity here for us to get higher up that hierarchy of needs and present our content in a much more imaginable and pleasurable and creative way, and we should value that. Because there's a risk if we don't look at creating a much more engaging experience for our users, that other people are going to look at these services and say, this all seems so difficult, so I think I'm going to start doing this for myself. In fact, a lot of the internet startups that we're working with at the moment come from students, young people who are saying, I don't have the time for this, and you're making it too difficult, and I'm going to start this, and this is going to be a service that's just going to make it simple for everybody. And it's very interesting to have that kind of discussion with that generation coming through. So if we don't do it for ourselves, other people are certainly going to do it, and I think we're going to see a huge number of new companies come into this area simply because we are making our content too difficult to use easily particularly across multiple publishers. So stepping back from that a moment and just thinking about some more general principles of what does all this mean in terms of how we can make our digital experience a bit more engaging. I think there are three main areas to concentrate our thoughts around. The first is this great approach from a New York-based web design agency, and their sort of head of creative services describes all interactions as needing to be like Fisher-Price, toy manufacturer. I can probably sense that might fill some of your hearts with a bit of fear and dread in terms of this is academic content. We don't want big primary coloured buttons on our website. But actually that simplicity is really important in making things more easy to use. And on the topic of easiness, Steve Krug, one of the world's leading usability experts, says something that seems really anti everything that publishers stand for, which is don't make me think as a user. Don't make me think. You know, I'm going to do enough thinking when I've got this paper and I'm working on my research project. I don't want to have to think about how to get the paper. So that's obviously important too. And the third, and I think really important area, and where I think we're going to see a lot more movement in the next couple of years, is interoperability. Jakob Nielsen saying here, we have to remember that users spend most of their time on other websites, and not just academic content websites, but all sorts of websites, personal and professional use. They're all merging into one. So the experience people have of our content is going to be reflected on based on their experiences of other kinds of content. So how do we fit our services into that much broader kind of environment? And how do we make our content more available in the spaces where people want to use them, regardless of whether or not we happen to own that particular service or site? So I think those are the three big meaty issues for us to think about improving. And I think beyond those three basic principles, we've got to keep our eye on the trends, and trends by their nature can be fairly transitory, but nevertheless they bring important learnings with them, and we need to consider where we can benefit from some of these things. And I think the first trend that I see is real stark simplicity. I'm still asked by some publishers to develop user guides for their online content. And I kind of think that defeats the object of ease of use. This is an online journal. If we have to produce a user guide for it, do we really think people have got time to sit down and read multiple publishers' user guides? We've got to make it easier. This is some bookmarking software called Pocket, and it's so easy to use. You don't need a video. You don't need a user guide. It's very intuitive. And one of the reasons these things are starting to feel intuitive is that they follow common design standards. So a lot of the consumer websites are adopting very similar approaches to the way in which they present their services. So you kind of get it because you've done something very similar on another site. When I talk to publishers about this, everybody is busy saying we've got to compete on features and functionality, and we've got to compete on technology. We're actually trying to create radically different experiences because somehow we feel that's going to bolster our brand, but it really defeats the usability of that content and makes things challenging for our users. So we've got some things to think about there. Another really interesting trend is sort of rise of infographics, the rise of using pictures and symbols to explain complex information. And so people can get it in an instant. How do we make our information really quick and easy to see in a snapshot? And this kind of approach is great for that. And more complex use of visualizations, really exciting area in publishing. This is an example of a search engine called Carto, and they do a visualization based on your keyword search that begins to show all sorts of, a bit like a mind map pattern of other related areas that you can explore in a much more dynamic way than trying to follow lots of sort of textual links. Social, of course, feels a bit old hat now, but continues to be a very important trend. And obviously what we're seeing now is the beginnings of the collapse of the big web-based social networking services. I mean, who in the room is surprised that the Facebook shares have been plummeting? I mean, totally overvalued. A website that has absolutely had its day, and the younger generation are leaving it in droves because they're getting mobile. And they're getting the social dimension from lots of kind of fragmented services rather than going to one place to have their social experience. So massive fragmentation in the social market, and we need to think about how we add social elements to the little pieces of content and services that we've got, rather than trying to offer the social service for academics. And then entertainment. This comes back to the pleasure principle again, the fun. This can be something very simple, as like this little app on the left here is built to sit on top of Twitter. And it's really fun to use. The bird changes colour as you type in your letters. It fills from green to red when you go over. And then it sends a lovely little cheeping sound when you send your tweet. And people enjoy using these things and have fun. And why not? But that principle can be applied to really quite serious content too. So this other website here is by the World Food Programme. It's called Free Rice. And you can go in and you answer a number of questions. And based on your success at those questions, the World Food Programme will donate free rice to a country that needs it. And as you go through it, you're learning about the policies and issues in a much more engaging way than them just presenting their brochure or asking you to read this tome on the problems in the third world. So this idea of making serious content fun to use and explore, I think, is really key. Another really exciting area is multi-screening. You know, we have mobile in the title of this conference today, but mobile isn't just about replicating what we've got on another platform. It's about thinking, how do we use that platform in a fundamentally different way, and how does it integrate with the other platforms that we make our content available on? This is an example of a BBC programme called Springwatch, a nature programme. So it's televised. They also have a website, and they also have an app and a mobile presence as well. And each of those channels do something slightly different, but they all work together. And they can be timed to work together, so you can watch the programme, and at the same time you can go onto the iPad and look at the app, and there are extra questions and information around the content. So it's not just multi-platform use, it's different content, different use for different platforms, and then how they integrate together. And then, of course, the massive rise of appification. Apps are so much more pleasurable to use than so many websites. So how those kind of tools are being designed is really going to affect how websites are designed in the future. And we're already beginning to see the rise of web-based services that have been appified. Amazon's Cloud Reader is a really good example of that. It looks and works very much like an app, but actually it's a web-based service. So apps are giving us a different experience of how to use and access services that is going to flow over into the way in which we design our main websites. So, what does all this mean for publishers? I think there's three main areas of consideration that came to my mind. I think we have to think about productivity. We have to think about how we're designing our services so that they're really useful and simple, and how they fit into the workflow of researchers, and creating this really seamless experience across different platforms. And perhaps one of the more sort of controversial areas is collaboration. So no publishers in Ireland except maybe elsewhere. Very few of us have sufficient content to be able to go it alone in terms of satisfying a user needs. Users have either very specific niche needs around a topic area or broader needs around a topic area. They don't have publisher-related needs. So what are we to do in terms of providing that seamless experience that's going to meet a user's needs, where our content is currently in lots of different silos that we're all trying to make look different because somehow we think that's going to add value. So we have actually, as an industry, done quite a lot of cooperation here already in terms of some of the common metadata standards and so on. But I'd love to see us move into common design standards. And I think we are going to see a rash of aggregating services come into this space to say publishers cannot do it. Some independent third parties are going to need to come in to provide that kind of cross-publisher seamless experience that meets the needs of the defined communities that are out there engaging with our content. And on that word of engagement, I think it's a bit easy to pay lip service to this, but I'd love to see us as an industry get in and have fun with our users. I know we've got very serious content, and I know it's complicated, but it doesn't mean we can't make it a joy to find and use and share and create that very highly personalised experience that we know our users want from us. And a lot of that is about ceding control, and it's about us loosening our boundaries a bit and making our content available to our users in much more flexible ways that are going to suit them rather than us. So my final point, as I always like to do, is just reflect on the future a little bit. I already talked about my idea that we're going to see a really big increase in aggregating services over the next 5 years. I also think we might see an increase in kind of fragmentation of some of the specialist services that we offer. And to give you one example, I had a Skype call recently with a new startup in New Zealand called Publons, and a young guy again, physicist background, who basically is setting up a cross-publisher post-publication review platform. So you can go in, read any article that you want, and then you can use the Publon system to rate and rank it. So when we start looking at the process of publishing and breaking that down into all its different constituent areas, other people are going to come in and see if they can do that better and do it in a way that meets the needs of specific communities rather than specific publishers with more contained remit for existence. So I think the big question for me is, this is a talk on website design and usability, but it kind of begs the question, is this something that publishers are going to need to become increasingly expert in, or is it going to be something that actually these specialist intermediaries are increasingly going to be taking care of for us as our partners in the future? So I will leave you with that final thought and hand over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.